Before we start, I would encourage you to have a set of the sermon notes. If you don't already have them, just go to the link below. You'll be able to print a set of the sermon notes from that link. Also want to encourage you to have some communion elements. You want to have some bread or a cracker. You want to have some juice or wine. If you don't have juice or wine, probably anything to drink would work. But you'll want to have those communion elements because here in about 20 minutes, when we get to the end of the sermon, we'll move right into a time of communion. So if you need any of those things, I would encourage you to pause the video right now. Get whatever you need. Once everything is ready, then go ahead and resume the playback. So I have a question for you. When was the last time you thought to yourself, I do not want to be here, but there's no turning back now? When's the last time you thought that to yourself? Was it the last time you went to the dentist? There have been plenty of times over the course of my life, lots and lots of times, when I thought to myself, I do not want to be here, but there's no turning back now. I tried to think of a really good example, and I came up with one. This happened to me about 3 decades ago. So I was in my mid-20s. I was an associate pastor for a church in southern Nevada, and I was about to enter a defensive driving class. Now, you know, of course, that when you get a speeding citation, you have the option of going to defensive driving to cause the citation to not go on your record. A lot of people choose to do that because if a citation goes onto your record, there's always the chance that it will cause your insurance rates to go up. And so I was about to enter this defensive driving class, except it wasn't a normal defensive driving class. You see, I had already received another citation within the previous 12 months, and I had already gone to the regular defensive driving class to have that ticket not go on my record. And then within 12 months, I got, you guessed it, a second speeding citation. And I didn't know if there was a way to prevent this second citation from going onto my record. And so I actually went to traffic court. And I appeared before the judge, and when it was my turn, I stepped right in front of the judge, and the judge said, "How do you plead, guilty or innocent?" And I said, "Your Honor, I'm guilty. But the reason that I wanted to appear before you today is because I have already received another citation over the past 12 months. Therefore, I don't have the option, as far as I know, of going once again to traffic school. And yet, Your Honor, I really don't want to have this second citation go on my record. I cannot afford to have my insurance rates go up. Your Honor, I'm throwing myself at your mercy. Is there any way that this could be prevented from going on to my permanent record?" And the judge kind of looked at me quizzically like, who is this goofball? And he said, "Well, yeah, you have the option of going to remedial defensive driving class." Now, you probably had no idea that there was such a thing as remedial defensive driving class. I had no idea that there was such a thing as remedial defensive driving class, but there was in southern Nevada 30 years ago. I don't know if that's still a thing now, but it was a thing back then. Now, back then, most of the defensive driving classes that I went to, yes, I went to more than one. Most of the defensive driving classes that I went to were 4-hour classes. If you have ever been to a defensive driving class, you know that it's 4 hours, it's not a lot of fun. And one of the things that you've probably also noticed if you've gone to defensive driving classes, it's kind of a rough crowd. It's not like you're going and hanging out with a bunch of doctors and lawyers at a country club. It's kind of a rough crowd when you go to a defensive driving class. And folks, I'm telling you, if you think that the defensive driving class that you've gone to was kind of a rough crowd, you cannot even begin to imagine what an incredibly rough crowd it was when I went to remedial defensive driving class in Las Vegas back in the 1990s. And that was the moment when I stepped into this classroom and I looked around and I felt like, maybe this was my own version of Scared Straight. I mean, it was a rough crowd there at this remedial defensive driving class. And my first thought was, I do not want to be here. It was an 8-hour class instead of a 4-hour class. I do not want to be here, but I also can't afford to have that ticket go on my record. There is no turning back now. That is a very silly example of a time in my life when I thought to myself, I don't want to be here, but there is no turning back now. I'm sure that you've had instances where you thought that to yourself as well. And the reason that I bring that up, the idea of I don't want to be here, but there's no turning back now, is because I feel like in the lectionary Old Testament reading we're about to take a look at, that for Jacob, that is probably how he was feeling at this moment in his life. Now, before I read this passage to you, I want to tell you the backstory. And the backstory is kind of long, but it's important and it's wild. And so I think you probably know most of this story, but let's just review. We remember that when Jacob was born, that he was a twin, and that his twin brother Esau was actually born first, just moments before Jacob was born. But the fact that Esau was born first, that made Esau the firstborn son in that family. And the reason why that's important is because whoever the firstborn son was, even if he had a twin brother who was just a few moments younger than he was, the fact that Esau was born first all of a sudden made him the recipient of a double portion of the physical inheritance, so the land and the property and the wealth. He received a double portion of that. Not only that, but maybe even more importantly, he would be the one to receive the spiritual inheritance as well. The father would pass the family's spiritual inheritance to the firstborn son. In this case, that was going to be Esau. And Jacob, as he got a little bit older and he started to understand these things, he was not happy about that. He wanted all of the things that Esau had coming to him. Jacob wanted those things for himself. And so you know that there was a moment when Esau, who was a man's man and was a hunter, he'd been out in the field and he came in from the field. Jacob, who was more of a homebody, had been cooking and was making this really delicious smelling stew. Esau comes in and he goes, "That stew, that smells good. Give me some of that stew." And Jacob says, "I'll give you a bowl of the stew, but in return you have to give me your share of the inheritance." And in what was probably the worst negotiation in human history, Esau says, "Yeah, that's fine. Just give me the stew." And so for a bowl of stew, Esau has given up his physical inheritance, all of the land, all of the property, all of the physical wealth, the money. You know, he's given it all up for a bowl of stew. So I hope that was some really, really good stew that Jacob had made that particular day. And so, and honestly, I mean, I don't think at this point Esau was mature enough that he really cared about those things. But there's still one thing that Jacob knew that he didn't have. And again, we've said maybe this is the more important thing. He isn't going to receive the spiritual inheritance that his father, that their father, that Isaac was going to pass along to Esau as the oldest son. And so Jacob and his mom, not good. Jacob and his mom come up with the plan in which they are going to trick Isaac. I started to say Esau. They're going to trick Isaac into giving the spiritual blessing to Jacob and not to Esau. Now, Esau, again, manly man. The Bible tells us that he was a very hairy man. That seems like too much information, but that's what the Bible tells us about Esau. And so what Esau doesn't realize is that behind his back, Jacob has gone and gotten some of Esau's clothes. So he's going to smell like Esau. He's going to be dressed like Esau. And they get some furry animal skins, and Jacob puts those animal skins on his arms. Esau is very old. He has no vision at this point. He's basically on his deathbed at this point. And Jacob goes and says, "Father, it's me, Esau. I'm ready for you to give me the family blessing, the spiritual blessing." And it tells us that Isaac was suspicious, that he says, "Well, you sound like Jacob, but you smell like Esau." And he puts his hands out and he feels the forearms that Jacob is covered with animal skins, and he says, "Yeah, you feel like Esau, you smell like Esau, you feel like Esau, you must be Esau." And at that moment, Isaac gave the family's spiritual blessing to Jacob, not to Esau. And it wasn't long after that that Esau hears what has happened. And at this point, Esau's had it, because he's already been manipulated out of his material inheritance. Now he's had Jacob trick Dad into giving him the spiritual inheritance as well. And so Esau says, "I'm going to kill him." And word gets back to Jacob that Esau wants to kill him. And so if you know the story, you know that it was Mom, again, who jumps in and says, "Hey, Jacob, we got to get you out of town. We got to get you out of the country. So go live with your Uncle Laban in a foreign land." And so that's what Jacob did. He got out of Dodge. He went and lived in this foreign land. While he was in this foreign land, you probably know that Jacob then ended up marrying sisters. He ended up marrying Leah, and he ended up marrying Rachel. And he starts a family, and he's able to kind of put together a life and put together a little bit of a following for himself. But there comes a point at which Jacob says, "Look, I need to go back to my homeland." But he knows that Esau is still alive, and he knows that even though it was decades ago, that the last time that he heard anything about his twin brother Esau, that Esau wanted to kill him. And so Jacob has sent word back home that he's coming home. He's bringing his wives, he's bringing his sons, he's bringing his flocks. He's bringing everything. He's coming back home. Esau, hope that's okay. Hope that everything that happened a long time ago, that's water under the bridge. And so, as Jacob is making his way back home, word comes to Jacob that Esau is coming to meet him. Okay? And Esau is bringing 400 men with him. Uh-oh. That does not sound good. That does not sound promising. So, the moment where we find our friend Jacob right now is he is about to cross the Jabbok River. And once he crosses the Jabbok, there's basically going to be no turning back. He's not that far from Esau at this point. And so this is a moment where maybe Jacob is thinking to himself, "I don't want to be here, but there's no turning back at this point. I'm going to have to go take my medicine at this point, see what happens, hope for the best." And it just so happens that it's at this very moment when he is having this maybe personal crisis, maybe he's having cold feet, who knows. But there's a mysterious stranger who makes a pretty incredible appearance to Jacob in this moment. So, now that I've taken all this time to tell you the backstory, let's go ahead and take a look at this scripture. This is Genesis chapter 32, verses 22 through 31. It says, "That night Jacob got up and took his 2 wives, his 2 female servants, and his 11 sons, and crossed the ford of the Jabbok. After he had sent them across the stream, he sent over all his possessions. So Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him till daybreak. When the man saw that he could not overpower Jacob, he touched the socket of Jacob's hip, so that his hip was wrenched as he wrestled with the man. Then the man said, 'Let me go, for it is daybreak.' But Jacob replied, 'I will not let you go unless you bless me.' The man asked him, 'What's your name?' 'Jacob,' he answered. Then the man said, 'Your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you have struggled with God and with humans and have overcome.' Jacob said, 'Please tell me your name.' But he replied, 'Why do you ask my name?' Then he blessed Jacob there. So Jacob called the place Peniel, saying, 'It is because I saw God face to face, and yet my life was spared. May God bless the reading of the incredible Word. So this is a powerful passage. And what I want to do right now is I want to go ahead and talk through the passage. There are several things in here that need a little bit additional explanation. After we talk through the passage, then we will quickly talk about 3 of the lessons that this passage has for us as people of faith. So, they're at the Jabbok. Jacob sends his wives and sends his sons and sends everything across. And now Jacob is going to be the last one to cross the Jabbok when all of a sudden this mystery person shows up and starts wrestling with Jacob. Now, if you're thinking to yourself, is that something that was common, millennia ago, Pastor Kerry? Well, the answer is no. As strange as that would be in the year 2025, that would have been equally strange thousands of years ago. But it also becomes clear that as this wrestling match continues, that Jacob realizes that this person that he's wrestling was not an ordinary person. And at some point, it tells us that this person that Jacob is wrestling with realizes that he is not going to be able to overcome Jacob, and so it says that he touches Jacob's hip, and Jacob's hip comes out of socket. And it tells us that Jacob continues the wrestling match even after that. Man, if I'm wrestling somebody and all of a sudden I have a hip that gets displaced, I'm going to be like, I'm out. I'm done. I would cry uncle at that point. But to his credit, Jacob continued wrestling. And so this person says, let me go, it's daybreak. And Jacob now makes it clear that he knows exactly who he's wrestling against. He says, I won't let you go unless you bless me. So Jacob knows that this is God that he's been wrestling with. So the wrestler, God, says to Jacob, what's your name? And he says, Jacob. Now, this is incredibly important. The name Jacob means deceiver. Maybe you already knew that. Maybe you had known that. Maybe you just forgot. But that's important because Jacob had been exactly that. He had been a deceiver. Look at the way that he deceived his father Isaac to get the family's spiritual blessing. Look at the way that he manipulated his brother. I mean, Jacob had been a pretty shady character when he was younger. Jacob means deceiver. Now, God says, what's your name? Jacob says, deceiver. My name's Jacob. And God says, your name will no longer be Jacob. Your name will no longer be deceiver. Instead, your name is going to be Israel. Why is that important? Well, first of all, it's important because Jacob was the father of 12 sons who were the heads of the 12 tribes of Israel. So Jacob was, for all intents and purposes, the head of the nation of Israel. But also because the name Israel means struggles with God. Your name will be Israel because you've struggled with God and have overcome. Did you know that the name Israel means struggles with God? Isn't that interesting? That God's chosen people, that God's chosen nation, the nation of Israel, it doesn't mean loves God or serves God. It means struggles with God. Fascinating. And so, at this point, Jacob says to God, please tell me your name. And he says, you already know who I am. And so he blesses Jacob, and then it says that Jacob called the place Peniel because it is here where I saw God face to face, and yet my life was spared. Because you know that they believed thousands of years ago in biblical times that if you saw God face to face, that you would die. And Jacob saw God face to face in the form of this man that he wrestled all night, and yet Jacob didn't die. So he called this place Peniel, the face of God. Now, I have gone way too long telling you the story. What I want to do very quickly now, and basically I'm just going to have to fill in the blanks. Is that okay? I'm just going to fill in the blanks here. As people of faith, there will be times when we struggle with God. As people of faith, there will be times when we struggle with God. Look, plenty of times in my life when I have struggled with God, my guess is that there have been times that you have struggled with God as well. Maybe you have struggled with certain temptations. Maybe you have struggled with doubts. Maybe you've struggled with anger, with frustration, with disappointment, whatever the struggle may have been. All of us have struggled with God. And it's important for us to be reminded that that's okay, that that's normal, that that's natural. That the name Israel, God's chosen people, it literally means struggles with God. And so there are going to be times when you and I are going to struggle with God. That's okay. That's expected. The second reminder this passage has for us is this: as people of faith, there will be times when we must leave something behind. Now, what I mean by that is that in this passage, Jacob left behind the name Jacob. He left it on the other side of the Jabbok. From now on, he was going to be Israel. And what's significant about that is that Jacob was leaving behind his identity as the deceiver. He was no longer going to be that person of questionable character. From now on, he was going to be a new person. He was going to be Israel. He was going to be the father of this great nation. And sometimes you know that we have to leave something behind as well. Maybe it's a behavior, maybe it's an addiction, but we have to leave something behind as well. That's the second reminder. The third reminder is this: as people of faith, there will be times when we must persevere. Jacob, to his credit, wrestled with God even after his hip was displaced. And again, I cannot imagine how excruciating that pain must have been. But he persevered. He knew that he was wrestling with God, and he didn't give up until God blessed him. And there are times in our lives when you and I have to persevere, especially when it's for our faith. And the last thing I want to do is I want to tell you how the story ends, because we said that this was a moment when undoubtedly Jacob was thinking, I don't want to be here, but there's no turning back now. There's 400 men coming with Esau. Is this going to be bad? It looks like it's going to be bad. And the Bible tells us that when Jacob and Esau saw each other across the field, that Esau ran to Jacob and hugged him. And the two of them reconciled, and Esau forgave Jacob. A beautiful ending to this story. And friends, there can be a beautiful ending to our stories as well. But we have to realize that there will be times when we will struggle with God. There will be times when we have to leave bad behaviors behind, and we are going to have to persevere at times. The last thing that I would ask you is this. In this passage, Jacob asks God to bless him. What do you think has been the greatest blessing or blessings that God has given you in your life? I encourage you to talk to God about that. And friends, even Jesus struggled. You know that when Jesus was in the garden, he said, God, is there any way that this can be taken away from me? But he said, but not my will, but yours be done. And he willingly went to the cross. So right now, as we honor the fact that Jesus willingly went to the cross, I'm going to invite you to grab your communion elements as I go ahead and grab mine. And I am going to invite you to partake with me at this time. The body of Christ, broken for us, we partake in remembrance of him. And the blood of Christ, shed for us, we drink in remembrance of him. Let's pray. God, we thank you for the example of Jacob.